So Ardmore Shipping just reported their Q1 earnings.
Mhm.
And I mean, the numbers here are just wild.
Yeah, they really are.
Their daily operating cost to run a medium-range tanker, just to keep the lights on and pay the crew, is $10,800. But the rate they are charging to rent that exact same ship out right now,
It's massive.
it's $52,100 a day.
Huh.
So today, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore the hidden mechanics of global trade. We're using Ardmore's Q1 report, their call transcript, and their slide deck as a sort of decoder ring.
Right, because this is about so much more than just a stock price.
Exactly. We want to understand the invisible geopolitical and structural fractures that are allowing a shipping company to basically print a 5 times daily profit margin.
What's fascinating here is that we aren't just looking at a historical scorecard of a company making money. I mean, when a shipping operation achieves this kind of margin expansion, it stops being a story about one company. It becomes an X-ray of the global economy. It shows us exactly how shifting infrastructure, aging supply lines, and global conflicts are creating these massive ripple effects that ultimately touch almost everything you buy.
They really do. And the top-line numbers they just reported are absolute shockers. We're looking at adjusted earnings of $23.6 million for the first quarter of 2026.
Which is huge.
Right. That is 58 cents per share, which beat Wall Street expectations by 7 cents. And their revenue came in at nearly $88 million, just completely crushing expectations by almost $30 million.
It's a blowout quarter for sure.
But a blowout quarter doesn't just, happen in a vacuum. You mentioned that daily rental rate of $52,100 a day. Let's dig into how they are actually generating that kind of cash.
Well, to understand the mechanism, you have to look at a metric the industry calls TCE, or time charter equivalent. You can think of it as the standardized daily rental rate their ships earn after all the voyage expenses are stripped out. So Ardmore's medium range, or MR tankers, they earned $33,700 a day in Q1.
Which alone is a fantastic number.
Exactly. But based on the bookings they have already locked in for the second quarter, those exact same ships are suddenly fetching that $52,100 a day figure.
Which brings us back to that massive spread.
Yeah.
I mean, they're operating cash break-even, meaning the absolute baseline cost to insure the vessel, run the ship, all of that is only $10,800 a day.
Yeah, the leverage is incredible.
When you are charging nearly 5 times your operating cost every single day for every ship in the water, you have a license to print cash. But, a margin that wide implies a massive constraint somewhere else in the system. How does a shipping company suddenly get the leverage to charge a 5x premium?
Well, you have to look at a global map to find that constraint. The immediate catalyst driving this rate spike is severe geopolitical disruption.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when we look at the geopolitical map right now, and I want to be really clear to you listening, we are strictly looking at the logistics data here. We are not taking any political sides regarding the U.S., Israel, Iran tensions, the Israel-Hamas conflict, or the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. We are just objectively looking at how these events physically impact maritime logistics.
Right, absolutely. And the physical disruption is staggering. The Ardmore report highlights the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz to a large portion of the commercial fleet.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a single vital choke point. Because of the security risks, approximately 130 product tankers are essentially trapped in the Middle East Gulf.
130 ships.
Just stuck.
Just stuck.
That's that.
To put that into perspective, this single disruption has impacted roughly 15% of global oil product flows and 30% of crude flows.
That is insane. It's like imagine the main highway connecting the world's biggest factory to the world's biggest city just suddenly gets shut down.
That's a great way to look at it. And simultaneously, 130 of your delivery trucks get locked inside a parking lot and just can't leave.
Mm.
But the city still needs its deliveries. So you have to drive the long way around, maybe taking back roads that double the distance.
Exactly.
And you have way fewer trucks available to do it. Obviously, you're going to charge an absolute premium for the few trucks you have left on the road.
That highway analogy perfectly captures the dynamic on the oceans right now. Because the Middle East capacity is locked up and those 130 ships are sidelined, the global energy market is just scrambling for replacement volumes.
They have to get the fuel from somewhere.
Right. And those replacement barrels are being sourced via long-haul imports. We are seeing massive product flows originating from the Atlantic Basin. So places like the U.S. Gulf Coast, Europe, and West Africa traveling all the way to the east. Voyage lengths are effectively doubling.
And obviously, if a voyage takes twice as long to complete, that specific ship is taken out of the available supply pool for twice as long, it artificially shrinks the whole global fleet.
It really does.
But wait, if ships are moving all this product from the west to the east, how are they getting back? Are they just sailing empty?
Often, yes, they are. You have ships ballasting, which is the industry term for sailing empty all the way back to the Atlantic just to pick up these lucrative loads.
Oh, wow.
And that adds an immense layer of inefficiency to the global fleet. A ship sailing empty is burning fuel and taking up days on the calendar without generating any revenue, which further constricts the supply of available tonnage.
I mean, that makes sense.
The report even notes that Asian refineries have actually needed to reduce throughput because they simply can't get the raw materials or ship out the refined products efficiently.
Meanwhile, refining margins in the Atlantic have reached their highest level in 3 years because of this sudden, desperate surge in demand to replace the lost Middle Eastern volumes. It's incredible how one choke point forces the entire global map to be redrawn.
Completely redrawn, yeah.
But, 130 trapped ships don't explain why Ardmore is making strategic moves for 2028. A conflict is temporary. You don't buy a $44 million asset for a temporary problem.
Right.
So what structural shift are they actually betting on here?
That is the crucial pivot. The underlying supply and demand fundamentals are shifting entirely independent of the current geopolitical shocks.
Okay.
The physical infrastructure of the world's refining capacity is migrating.
Let's break down the mechanics of that migration. Why are refineries physically moving? Is it like purely a labor cost issue, or is it more about dodging Western environmental regulations and getting closer to the actual crude extraction?
It's heavily weighted toward the latter. Older refineries in the United States and Europe are facing massive compounding compliance costs.
Right.
Western environmental regulations make it incredibly expensive to upgrade a 50-year-old refinery to modern standards. As a result, many of these aging Western facilities are simply shutting down.
Which means the capacity has to pop up somewhere else.
Exactly. Meanwhile, new, massive, state-of-the-art refining capacity is coming online in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, much closer to the actual points of extraction.
So the location where the crude oil actually gets turned into usable fuel is moving further away from the end consumers in the West.
That's the key.
Even if consumer demand stays completely flat, like even if you and I don't use a single extra drop of fuel, that finished product has to travel a much greater distance to reach the gas station or the airport.
And in the shipping industry, this is measured as ton-mile demand. It is the volume of the cargo multiplied by the distance it travels.
Got it.
Because the refineries have moved further away from the consumers, ton-mile demand is going up permanently. The global supply chain is structurally stretching out.
Okay, so that handles the demand side of the equation. We clearly need ships to sail longer distances, but let's look at the supply side of the ships themselves. The Ardmore report notes the average age of the global MR fleet is at a historical high of 13.4 years.
Yeah.
On its face, 13 years doesn't sound terribly old, but it implies a massive chunk of the fleet is approaching a pretty steep cliff.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that 13.4-year average is a ticking clock. The commercial shipping industry operates on a very strict, heavily regulated life cycle.
Right.
Within the next 5 years, 50% of the global MR fleet will be over 20 years old.
50%. That is a huge chunk. I imagine a 20-year-old ship is kind of like a 20-year-old commercial airplane. It doesn't necessarily fall out of the sky, but the maintenance costs to keep it certified, combined with, terrible fuel efficiency compared to modern designs, eventually makes it a liability rather than an asset.
That is a highly accurate comparison.
Is that what triggers this scrapping window you see at the 20-year mark?
Yes, exactly. At 20 years, a vessel must undergo its 4th special survey. This requires putting the ship into a dry dock for massive, expensive overhauls.
It's taking it completely out of the water.
Right out of the water. The X-ray the hull, check steel thickness, rebuild the engines. We're talking millions of dollars in capital expenditure just to keep it legally seaworthy. Furthermore, the International Maritime Organization has rolled out strict new carbon intensity indicators, or CII ratings.
Oh, right. So an older ship built in, say, 2006, simply burned too much fuel to meet the new green standards.
Correct. They physically cannot compete with the fuel economics of a modern vessel.
Makes sense.
Now, in a strong rate environment like we have today, owners might swallow the overhaul costs and keep them running a little longer. But their utilization levels drop significantly because major oil companies often refuse to charter ships over 15 or 20 years old due to safety and environmental
It's
policies.
just too much risk for them.
Exactly. Eventually, the math flips, and it becomes more economical to sail the ship to a beach and scrap it for its raw steel than to keep repairing it.
So we have 50% of the fleet about to age out. The logical assumption is that global shipyards are working 204/7, pouring concrete and building replacements as fast as possible.
You would think so.
But the data in this report tells a completely different story. The current order book, which is the total number of new MR ships contracted to be built, represents only 15% of the total existing fleet.
Yeah.
And for the slightly smaller handy-sized ships, the order book is just 5%, against an average fleet age of 18 years. We are retiring half the fleet, but only building enough to replace 15%. Why is there such a massive shortfall?
Because we physically lack the global industrial capacity to replace them quickly. You cannot just flip a switch and create a new shipyard.
Correct.
Following the 2008 financial crisis, the shipping industry experienced a brutal decade-long depression. Dozens of shipyards in Asia went bankrupt or consolidated. We lost immense global shipbuilding capacity, specifically the dry docks required to build these vessels, as well as the skilled labor forces.
The capacity just vanished. And now that we desperately need new ships, I assume the remaining yards are totally booked up for years in advance.
They are. It takes years from the moment you sign a contract to the moment a ship hits the water. This creates a severe structural squeeze.
Right.
You have structurally higher ton-mile demand due to the shifting refineries, combined with a rapidly aging fleet hitting that 20-year scrapping wall, and a critically constrained shipyard pipeline that physically cannot build ships fast enough.
It's the definition of a perfect storm. Shrinking fleet, longer routes, maxed out shipyards, and geopolitical chaos throwing a wrench into the immediate logistics. Knowing all this, how does a disciplined management team allocate capital? What is Ardmore actually doing with the mountain of cash they are generating from these $52,000 a day rates?
Well, this is where we get a masterclass in capital allocation. During a boom cycle, it is very easy for management teams to get undisciplined, over-leverage themselves and buy assets at the peak of the market.
Right, getting greedy.
Yeah. But Ardmore's strategy, as laid out in the report, is highly deliberate and defensive.
Well, they are definitely rewarding the people holding the stock. They announced they are doubling their dividend payout ratio.
Which is fantastic for investors.
Yeah, instead of paying out 1/3 of their adjusted earnings, they are now paying out 2/3. For Q1, that translates to 39 cents per share, which is an implied 9% yield. The report notes they have returned 20% of their market cap to shareholders since 2022 alone.
Returning that level of capital shows immense confidence in their forward cash flow, and they can afford to do it because they already handled their heavy lifting.
Winning.
They completed an extensive dry docking and upgrade program in 2025. As a result, their fleet maintenance capital expenditures are dropping dramatically from $30 million last year to just $8 million this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, their fleet is fully refreshed, out of the shipyard and on the water, capturing these peak daily rates.
Let's talk about their active fleet management, though, the buying and selling of vessels, because the math here looks completely backwards at first glance.
It does seem counterintuitive.
The report details that they opportunistically sold a 12-year-old MR tanker built in 2014 for $35.5 million. At the exact same time, they signed contracts with a shipyard in China to build 2 brand-new handy-sized product and chemical tankers for $44.9 million each.
Right.
Wait, let's unpack the math there. They sold a 12-year-old aging ship for $35.5 million, and they're buying a brand-new state-of-the-art vessel for only about $9 million more. Why is a 12-year-old used ship commanding a price almost identical to a brand new one?
It is a brilliant illustration of market psychology and the premium placed on immediate cash flow.
Okay.
Remember that massive shortage of available ships we just discussed. Because rates are at $52,000 a day right now, buyers are desperate for ships that can be put on the water today to capture that revenue.
So they'll pay whatever it takes.
They are willing to pay a massive inflated premium for an older asset because it generates cash tomorrow morning. The secondhand market is historically elevated. Ardmore even noted that ships they bought just a few years prior have risen 30 to 35% in asset value.
So Ardmore is basically looking at the current frenzy and saying, you want to overpay for a 12-year-old ship right now? Be our guest. We'll take the cash.
Exactly.
They are playing a massive arbitrage game. They sell the inflated older asset to a desperate buyer today and use those inflated dollars to lock in new builds at a relatively reasonable price.
The catch with the new builds, of course, is that they won't be delivered until late 2028.
Right, you have to wait.
But Ardmore is trading the immediate gratification of current rates for a long-term strategic advantage. They are constantly lowering the average age of their fleet while extracting maximum value from the peak of the market.
And the future of that fleet they are building for 2028 is really specific. I noticed they included a $3 million upgrade package on these new ships.
Yes, the coating.
They are being built to full IMO 2 specification with something called marine line tank coatings. I have to push back here. A $3 million paint job sounds absolutely absurd.
Right.
How does marine line actually differ from a standard tank chemically or physically to justify that kind of price tag?
It is entirely about the chemistry of the coating, and it is the key to ultimate trading flexibility. A standard product tanker's tanks are coated in epoxy,
Right.
and standard epoxy is slightly porous on a microscopic level. It absorbs trace amounts of whatever chemical it is carrying. If you carry dirty crude oil, that epoxy absorbs some of the residue.
Which means cleaning it is a nightmare.
Yes. To switch that tank to carry clean aviation fuel requires days of intensive hot washing and heavy chemical cleaning to ensure there is zero cross-contamination.
Because obviously you cannot have trace amounts of crude oil ending up in the jet fuel of a commercial airliner.
Exactly the issue. The turnaround time is incredibly slow. Marine line, however, is a tightly cross-linked polymer. It cures into a highly dense glass-like finish. It has virtually zero absorption.
Which means the cleaning process is vastly faster.
Radically faster. It allows the vessel to become a chemical chameleon.
A chemical chameleon, I like that.
On one voyage, the ship can carry industrial diesel. It can discharge that cargo, do a rapid, simple wash, and on the return voyage, pivot entirely. It can carry commodity chemicals or sunflower oil or molasses or even advanced renewable fuels like biodiesel and ethanol.
So they are refusing to lock themselves into just the fossil fuel market. If the demand for jet fuel drops in a specific region, but suddenly there is a massive spike in demand for vegetable oil or renewable diesel, Ardmore doesn't have to sit on empty ships.
No, they don't.
They don't have to ballast back across the ocean empty. They can just follow the highest margin.
It is the ultimate optionality. The report explicitly states they aren't leaning into chemical transport purely for philosophical reasons. They are manufacturing trading options. They direct their ships where the highest margin exists on any given day. Right now, even their smaller chemical tankers are trading almost exclusively in clean petroleum products because that happens to be where the highest rates are.
Because of the geopolitical squeeze we talked about?
Yes. But when the market shifts, those marine line-coated ships can pivot instantly without spending a week in port getting scrubbed down.
It acts as an incredible hedge against the future. They are maintaining a very low break-even operating cost of $11,700 a day, while building a fleet that can carry almost any liquid commodity the global economy requires in 2028 and beyond.
Knowledge is most valuable when you can apply it. When you truly understand the strategy embedded in this earnings report, you stop seeing just a shipping company.
Yeah.
You start to see the invisible physical infrastructure that keeps the global economy humming. You see how energy security, supply chain resilience, and capital discipline all intersect on the steel deck of a tanker.
Which brings us back to you, listening to this right now. Why does this deep dive matter for your understanding of the world? Because we are watching a masterclass in how to navigate global volatility.
We really are.
Ardmore isn't just reacting to the news cycle. They are positioning themselves for the permanent structural realities of the next decade. Whether you are looking at supply chain resilience for your own business, analyzing energy security, or just trying to understand how disciplined management handles a windfall of cash, this is the blueprint.
They recognize that the map is physically being redrawn. The global fleet is rapidly aging out with limited replacement capacity, and the logistical demands of the future will require supreme versatility over specialization.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering thought to ponder. Ardmore is building these highly versatile polymer-coated ships for 2028 to carry everything from diesel to renewable fuels to molasses. It makes you wonder, as the world slowly tries to transition away from fossil fuels, will the shipping companies that survive be the ones that stop calling themselves oil tankers and start treating their ships like giant floating multi-tools?
It is a fascinating evolution of the industry. The cargo will undoubtedly change over the next 20 years, but the fundamental need to move it across the oceans will only grow.
Remember how we started this deep dive? Looking at a standard financial report is a decoder ring. The numbers on the page, that 52,000 a day in revenue, that 35 million secondhand ship sale, they aren't just accounting math.
No, they're not.
They are the jagged white lines on the X-ray of our global supply chain, showing us exactly where the pressure points are and revealing who is figuring out how to fix them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive crafted just for you. We'll catch you next time as we continue to unpack the hidden stories behind the numbers.